This is going to sound strange coming from a travel blogger, but travel is literally ruining the world. Or at least some of the ways that we travel is ruining the world. However, I do believe that there are ways that we can travel better and actually improve the world rather than ruin it by travel. So I've put together a list of things that I'm going to try and implement in my travels going forward, and also that I'm going to share on here more to hopefully show you how you can travel more sustainably as well and make the world a better place as we do it. So here are some ways that I think travel is ruining the world, and I'll also go into what we can do about it. The first one is over-tourism. Over-tourism is the crowding of very popular and touristy places. With over-tourism, it gets to the point where the negative aspects of tourism, which include crowding, loss of culture, noise, outweigh the positive impacts of tourism, which include economic gains, sharing ideas, and building new businesses. There are loads of over-touristy places all over the world. Places including Barcelona, Venice, Mallorca, loads of places in Spain, places in Greece, and then you go over to Asia, you've got loads of places in Thailand, Bali, then you've got places in South America like Machu Picchu. All of these could be classed as over touristy. In fact, even Mount Everest and Antarctica could these days be classed as victims of over tourism. So what are we going to do about it? Personally, I am not gonna say I'm never gonna visit any over touristy destinations ever again. In fact, I climbed to Everest Base Camp this very year, and I'm also going to Barcelona next week. I do think it is still fine to visit these destinations, but I think it is important as ever to visit them better. So that means avoiding staying in Airbnbs in busy European cities. So some European cities have actually banned Airbnb now because it doesn't benefit the local economy much at all. You can also support local businesses, whether that be restaurants, tour companies, or smaller attractions. So favour them over the chains, the companies that are based outside of the country. So for instance, when I'm in Barcelona, I'm planning a tapas crawl with a local company, and I'm also staying in a boat, which I've checked and is locally owned. So try and stay in local accommodation where possible. Other ways that you can avoid contributing to over-tourism include looking at the time of year to go. So for instance, it's usually a good idea to visit these over-touristy places outside of peak season. So I'm visiting Barcelona in September, which is not the quietest time, but it is a lot quieter than July and August. And another way to visit these over-touristy places respectfully is just to enjoy the local culture. Try and speak a few words of the language. By the way, in Barcelona that is Catalan and not Spanish. And also try to engage in their culture a bit more, learn a few things about the culture, do cultural activities, and try and basically go there to learn about their life. Try and slot in to these places rather than put your own individual kind of ideas and perceptions on these places. However, another way to combat over-tourism is to simply go to less touristy places. And I do often go to a lot of less touristy places. For instance, last year I spent a week in Algeria, then I spent some time in Senegal and Gambia, and that was all lovely, and we managed to get quite far off the tourist trail in all of that. This Christmas I'm taking a trip through Germany, and I'm going to some underrated Christmas markets rather than the most famous ones that you hear about again and again. And last year we went to Turkey, and we did go to Istanbul, but we also went far into the east of Turkey to Erzurum and Kars, which are two Turkish cities that you very rarely hear about. So do think outside the box a bit as well. Think about the destinations that don't need tourists and maybe don't want that many tourists, and think about how you can maybe spend less time in them and more time in places that actively do want tourists. This is kind of related to over-tourism, but I did also just want to talk a little bit about gentrification and loss of culture while travelling. And usually this does happen in over-touristy destinations, but not always. Now obviously cultures are always evolving and changing. Our culture has influences from cultures all over the world, so does pretty much every other culture in the world. However, some places that you go to, I'm thinking in particular of some places in Southeast Asia and some places in Spain and probably some places in Greece as well, have been kind of had the culture of the people who visit most very much enforced on them. And sometimes this is really at odds with their traditional culture. So maybe not so much places in Europe, but some places in Southeast Asia. I'll always remember when I went to Vang Vieng in Laos, and Laos is quite a conservative country really, and there were just hundreds of drunk backpackers just parading through the streets being really, really rowdy, and that is not Lao culture at all. So that is a big issue with travelling. When the travellers put their culture against a culture that is so different to theirs, it can have bad effects for that country. So to avoid doing this, all you need to do really is engage more in cultures when you visit, rather than go somewhere and go to an Irish pub, or go somewhere and expect everyone to speak English, or go somewhere and do exactly what you do on a Saturday night at home. See what they do on a Saturday night and engage in that rather than implementing what you do over there. There is nothing wrong with exchange of cultures, and like I say, it happens naturally all over the world, but it does just make me uncomfortable when I see this kind of backpacking culture or travelling culture that is so much at odds with the local culture. So social wise, to be a more sustainable traveller, it's always best to just do things like absorb the culture, stay in locally owned hotels, use local businesses, and just generally be respectful, read up on cultural norms and work out how you can engross yourself within the society rather than be a super obvious tourist. But let's talk a little bit about the environmental aspects of travel. So first, let's talk about the environmental degradation of some habitats. Now, this is probably it's very important, but actually tourism in many ways has more benefits to this than negatives, but I do just want to talk about it to begin with. So in some countries all over the world, areas that are home to native animals have been destroyed and altered to make way for tourism projects. Now, this is a very nuanced topic because obviously people are building their tourism industry by doing so, and I mean, I know in the UK we unfortunately cut down a lot of our wildlife a very, very, very long time ago. So I don't really want to criticise any countries for doing so, but it is something to be aware of, is that mass tourism often does mean getting rid of some habitats. However, I would say that the coin is kind of flipped on this one. Tourism is actually being more beneficial to this now, because a lot of tourism projects, including seeing wildlife in Africa, seeing orangutans in Borneo, they are actually helping to protect these animals, and that is because tourist money is coming in. Like I say, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but as long as you're holidaying with responsible tour operators, then generally this isn't so much of a thing to worry about these days. But let me know in the comments if you disagree, because I don't know everything about this subject. It's just my thoughts from my travels. But when I was in Borneo recently, we went to the Orangutan Rehabilitation Centre, and it was really, really lovely, and I did feel that by going there and supporting them, then I was making a difference to the orangutans. My video where we went to see the orangutans at the rehabilitation centre, and then we went deeper into the jungle and we actually saw an orangutan in the wild, I am donating 20% of all the ad revenue that I make off that video to the Orangutan Rehabilitation Centre, and I've decided I'm going to donate 20% of this video also to the Orangutan Rehabilitation Centre. So do please watch it with all the ads on and share to anyone who you think might be interested. Now let's talk a bit about carbon emissions. So there's no denying that travel does cause carbon emissions to be rather high. Aviation in particular is one of the biggest culprits for carbon emissions in the world. Now, before you say anything, I'm not saying don't fly. I personally do still fly, and in all honesty, it isn't really us that are the problem. Unless you're a billionaire with a private jet who's flying off every week, then you are the problem. However, I do think it is good as a general movement to be encouraging people to fly less and to be finding good alternatives to flying where possible. And this is why a huge focus on this channel is overland travel. So I love overland travel for other reasons as well. I love the adventure of it. It's my preferred way to travel rather than flying. If I had time, I'd overland travel everywhere. But I do also recognise the eco-friendly benefits of travelling by train, bus or ferry. But I'm not giving up flying at all. I've just made the decision that every time I go to Europe, I'm going to try and travel at least one way without flying. This might not always be possible, but I'm going to try my hardest to at least do it 80% of the time. Obviously for a lot of people that isn't possible. If you're travelling with kids it may be less possible, or for people who just simply don't have the time. There are programs that you can donate to kind of counteract your emissions. I would always suggest donating to charities that are helping the world, but some of the actual companies that kind of market themselves as this are a bit of a scam, so do your research wisely. I'll put some suggestions on the screen here. Now, I'm definitely not perfect when it comes to travelling better. I try and do what I can to go to destinations that want tourists, to use local businesses, to go to ethical animal attractions, and to travel overland where I can. But I definitely am guilty of doing a few of the things in each category. And I think the thing is, we don't all have to be perfect. We can do what we think is best to do imperfectly. So I do stick to these things about 80% of the time. But I mean, next month I am going to an all-inclusive. I don't necessarily like all-inclusives, but it was the most feasible option for that particular trip. And I also really do disagree with people who see someone doing something well once or twice and then criticise them after that, where they wouldn't criticise if they were just travelling without a conscience all of the time. So yeah, all I'm saying is this is what I'm going to try and do to travel a little bit better. And I've actually started a newsletter about all of this. It's called the Better Travel Newsletter, and it will just be about tips and tricks to become a more sustainable traveller, but also while acknowledging that I'm on this journey. If you're watching this, you're probably on this journey, and we're imperfect, so we're not always going to get it 100% of the time. So if you are interested in signing up to that newsletter, so far I have covered travelling from London to Morocco without flying, and I've also covered being a more sustainable traveller in Borneo. I'm going to cover things like sustainable travel at Everest Base Camp, travelling by train throughout Europe and how to do it affordably, essential sustainable items that you need, and my very exciting trip that I actually will be on when this goes live, which is a DIY Mediterranean cruise where I'm taking ferries instead of cruising, because cruising does have a few sustainability issues as well. So if you are interested in any of that, then do give my newsletter a follow, and you can also follow me on social media channels as well. Everything will be linked in the description. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything I've spoke about in this video. Do drop me a comment. Let me know what you think about sustainable travel, what you think we could be doing, or whether you think we should be putting pressure on the people higher up than us, because we can only do so much as the little people. But what is the ocean but what do they say? What is the ocean but an ocean full of drops? Or it may be a drop in the ocean, but what is the ocean but millions of drops, or something like that. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you will stick around for some more. Bye!